Hello everyone, what's up? Welcome to GMA24 Update News Channel. Hope you will enjoy our news video. Before we begins, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Here's the news title. Tories call for pact with reform to save UK from Starmer and Reeves. Kemi Badenoch is urged to strike a deal to save the country. We all love. Senior Conservatives are calling for Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage to strike a deal to save the country. We all love, from another half-decade of Labour in power. Tories, who are desperate to oust Sir Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves want the Conservatives and Reform UK to reach an agreement and stop the centre-right vote splitting at the next election. There are even calls for the Tory and Reform activists to start working together in the May local elections. Lord Mackinlay, a former Conservative MP who was also Deputy Leader of UK, urged the parties to agree a deal to avoid the harm he believes would be caused by a decade of Labour in power. He said, "I have said repeatedly that the danger to our country of an ongoing, and heaven forbid, re-elected socialist government is so great that it is the duty of parties of the right to do whatever is necessary to stop them." The inescapable conclusion is that Conservatives and Reform need to work together to stop the ongoing damage to the country we all love. The peer warned that decisions in Westminster can permanently damage a nation and pushed for serious discussions before the next election. The calls to avoid splintering of the right-wing vote and letting Labour win power again come just days after the Bank of England halved the growth forecast for this year to just 0.75% and warned of a hike in inflation. Conservative MP Peter Bedford said, "As Conservatives, we should be pragmatic and ensure that all options that maximize the chance of removing this hard-left socialist government remain open." A former Tory minister warned, "You can't have two parties competing on the right of politics because inevitably that will help Labour to win." He fears that if Reform stands across the country, Labour will be able to creep back into power with an even smaller share of the vote than the 34% they won in the summer election. Alarm at the rise of Reform has intensified in both Conservative and Labour circles after a series of polls showed it is the most popular party. A Find Out Now poll put Reform on 29%, 4 points ahead of Labour and 11 points in front of the Tories. Former Business Secretary Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg has said, "A Tory Reform pact would be devastating for the Socialists and could pave the way for a truly Conservative coalition." He wants activists to cooperate ahead of May's local elections. He told the Sunday Express, "I would support informal local election pacts between the Conservatives and Reform. It would help to build up trust and show the public how much common ground there is between us." A high-profile Conservative who has been at the heart of power machinations in the party said, "I think we should keep channels open and see how things develop." Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman also wants to unite the right, recently warning, "There isn't space in British politics for two Conservative parties," and a Tory peer said, "I certainly believe we need a Tory Reform pact at parliamentary level." David Campbell Bannerman, a former deputy leader of UKIP who now chairs the Conservative Democratic Organisation, suggested there could be agreements at a local level, which would see one candidate make way for another if they signed up to a common mission and policy stance. But a spokesman for Tory leader Mrs. Badenoch said, "Reports of a Tory Reform pact are complete and utter nonsense," adding, "The Conservative Party will not negotiate with people who want to destroy us." However, a former Conservative cabinet minister welcomed the impact Reform has already had on Mrs. Badenoch's party, suggesting that new policy of denying migrants who have claimed benefits the right to settle in the UK through the indefinite leave to remain process was in response to pressure from the rival grouping. He said, "I think that Reform has got to keep up the pressure on the Tories. If they don't, we won't see any sensible policy development from Kemi." The announcement on indefinite leave to remain was a step in the right direction, but it was pretty faltering. If the Conservatives don't start seeing council seats going in Reform's direction, they won't change. I'm afraid that they still think that they have a God-given privilege to be the standard bearer for the right in this country. That delusion will start to evaporate when they see seats hemorrhaging away from them. The impact that reform can have on a race was demonstrated in Rother Valley at the last election. Incumbent Conservative candidate Alexander Stafford lost to Labour won by just 998 votes, with Reform taking 7,679 votes and finishing third. I don't think we need any official deal with Reform, but I think it's madness in places where Reform will never win, or came a distant place behind the Tories for them to stand and split the vote. The important thing is to not split the vote to stop Labour getting back in. Former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries warned that any attempt to bring Reform and the Tories together would split the Tories. She said, "Almost half of Conservative MPs aren't actually Conservatives or even know or understand the principles of conservatism, and would be more comfortable as Lib Dems. They would recoil at the prospect of being aligned to Reform and being identified with right-wing social, free market, or economic policies. If the prospect of a pact or a merger were proposed by either Badenoch or Farage, the Conservative Party would undoubtedly split. It is almost ungovernable with the present MP demographic. Therefore, the chances of any kind of pre-election pact are almost certainly zero." Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp predicted the Tories will be able to win without Reform, saying, "Make a strong enough case to win the next general election," but warned that if conservative-minded vote Reform, it simply hands victory to Labour, and we saw that last July in dozens and dozens of seats across the country. Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe showed no enthusiasm when asked about the potential for a Tory-Reform link-up. He pointed to how then-Brexit Party leader Mr. Farage stood down candidates in Tory-held seats in 2019, helping pave the way for Mr. Johnson's landslide win. He said, "Nigel stood down in all the Tory seats last time and gave Boris an 80-seat majority. Tell me what he did with it. He didn't even do Brexit well. We had the Northern Ireland Protocol, so we got most of Britain out, but we left a leg in the wretched socialist empire in Europe." Brendan Clark-Smith, a former Conservative MP who lost his Bassett Law seat to Labour by 5,768 votes, with Reform taking 9,751, said, "I found out to my peril that having two parties on the right simply splits the vote and helps let Labour in. But I didn't lose my seat because Reform stood against me. I lost my seat because Conservatives were angry and stayed at home." Labour won despite performing poorly, and there is now even less appetite for them. The Conservative historian Lord Roberts backed the Tory leader's position, saying, "Kemi Badenoch is quite right not to make any overt pact with Reform, which wishes to replace and destroy us." Calls for a Tory Reform pact have ignited a fierce debate within the Conservative Party, with senior figures urging Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage to join forces to prevent another term of Labour governance under Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. The fear among the Tories is that a split in the centre-right vote could allow Labour to remain in power, despite what they see as its poor governance and economic mismanagement. Lord Mackinlay, a former Conservative MP and deputy leader of UKIP, has been among the most vocal advocates for a formal arrangement, arguing that the threat posed by Labour is too great to ignore. He insists that a decade of Labour rule could cause irreversible harm to the country and that it is the responsibility of right-leaning parties to unite against a common opponent. According to him, serious discussions must take place before the next election to ensure that the right-wing vote is not divided. This call for unity comes at a time when the economic outlook remains bleak, with the Bank of England lowering growth forecasts and warning of rising inflation. Conservative MP Peter Bedford echoes the concerns, stating that pragmatism should prevail and all options must be considered to maximize the chances of removing what he calls the hard-left socialist government. Another former Tory minister warned that having two competing parties on the right only benefits Labour, as it enables them to win with a lower percentage of the vote. Reform UK has been gaining momentum in the polls, with a recent Find Out Now survey placing them at 29%, ahead of Labour, and significantly ahead of the Conservatives. This surge has heightened concerns within Tory ranks, with prominent figures such as Jacob Rees-Mogg advocating for local election pacts to build trust and cooperation between the two parties. He argues that working together in the May local elections could pave the way for a broader national agreement in the general election. Despite these calls for unity, there is significant opposition within the Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch's spokesperson has dismissed any notion of a pact as complete and utter nonsense, stating that the Conservatives will not negotiate with those who seek to replace them. Some within the party believe that a merger or pact would be more damaging than beneficial, splitting the party along ideological lines. Nadine Dorries has warned that nearly half of current Conservative MPs do not align with traditional right-wing policies and may resist any association with reform, potentially leading to a deeper fracture within the party. The debate over the necessity and viability of a Tory reform pact is also influenced by historical precedents. Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe pointed to Nigel Farage's decision to stand down Brexit Party candidates in Tory-held seats in 2019, which contributed to Boris Johnson's landslide victory. However, Lowe remains skeptical about whether such an arrangement would work again, criticizing the way Brexit was handled and arguing that the Conservatives squandered their opportunity. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been a prominent advocate for uniting the right, arguing that British politics does not have space for two conservative parties. She believes that a failure to coordinate will only benefit Labour. Meanwhile, Conservative Democratic Organization Chairman David Campbell Bannerman has proposed local-level agreements where one candidate steps aside in favor of another if they share a common policy stance. The battle for right-wing unity extends beyond Westminster, with discussions about potential cooperation at the grassroots level. Some Tory and Reform activists are already discussing working together in the May local elections to test the feasibility of a broader national pact. The impact of such cooperation was evident in the recent Rother Valley election, where the Tory candidate lost to Labour by just 998 votes, while Reform took nearly 8,000 votes, more than enough to have secured a Conservative victory had the vote not been split. Brendan Clark-Smith, a former Conservative MP who lost his seat to Labour, in Bassetlaw, has acknowledged the damaging effect of a divided right-wing vote. However, he argues that his loss was not solely due to Reform's presence, but also because disillusioned Conservatives chose to stay home rather than vote. He suggests that unless the Tories regain the confidence of their voter base, a pact with Reform alone will not be enough to win back seats. Looking ahead, the question of whether the Conservatives and Reform can reach an agreement remains open. While some see a pact as the only way to prevent another Labour government, others believe it could lead to further division within the Conservative Party. Whether formal cooperation materializes or not, the growing influence of Reform UK is undeniable, and it is forcing the Tories to reconsider their strategies for the next election. Let me know in the comment below. If you like my video, please press like button and subscribe for more. Hope I'll see you in next video.